record. So this week, as Chris, female Chris, has so rightly remarked, we will be looking at the Nubian world, the land of Kush, and otherwise known as the Black Pharaohs. And when we were planning to do this on Tuesday, I was full of confidence. I thought, right, we'll do the Nubians. We'll remember all those films where Hatshepsut is chucking the Nubians down the well, and all these terrible things are happening to them. And I had a little bit of bias in my mind, thinking that the Nubians wouldn't be able to provide the great archaeology that we see further up the Nile, further into Egypt. And I'm completely wrong, thank you. So I'm gonna up the Black Pharaohs. I'm gonna say the Kingdom of Kush and the Empire of Kush has got so much to teach us and to tell us about a world that is sometimes greatly forgotten. Now, what you can see behind me is some really nice miniature pyramids, and it has been said and it has been remarked that this kingdom, as you can see, which branches off down into the White and then the Blue Nile, south of Khartoum, you could. It must be said that it might be easy to find information on these people, because but in archaeology the concentration has always mainly been on ancient Egypt. And at one time, the kingdom of the Kushites, the kingdom of Kush, the Nubians, the Black Pharaohs, were the people who actually ruled over Egypt. They actually conquered Egypt. There was an empire over 1,000 miles from north to south, and actually ranged all the way as far north into the likes of Lebanon and Jerusalem. And they fought against the Assyrian might. And these people were on the map of the world for a good 1,000 years, and they had great periods when these people were at the heart of worldwide civilization. So in my little doings, when I prepare something like this, I always like to go to books. I'm always thinking, right, I can read a nice couple of bits and pieces in archaeology by Renfrew and Barn, right? Nothing. And I'm thinking, right, that sort of complexes my situation. So then I looked at the story of archaeology, and guess what? In the top 100 civilizations and great things in archaeology, surely it's going to be in here. It's not. So then I was left to doing lots of other little bits of research around the edge. And when you do research around the edge, you start to think, well, why don't I do an article of the week to start off with? Let's just do a blonde article of the week. Let's just sort of tell you something about this world from a press release, right? And that's exactly where we're going to go, if you don't mind, because it sort of starts you asking the questions that you need to ask. So what we've got an article from 2011. I'm going to share it on the screen. It's entitled "Remains of the Ancient Palace Discovered," and I'm going to share this, and that's what you should have on your screen. It should be showing some remains. Am I right? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, this would be like switching on the dial on television, and suddenly you've got this on your screen, and it's and the archaeologist saying this is the remains of an ancient palace that has been discovered in 2011, and then it goes, only a small proportion of the structure, possibly an ancient palace. Where does that look like? It's definitely got to be Egypt. Has been excavated so far in central Sudan. What do we know about Sudan? Well, what I know about Sudan is that they've had lots of wars in Sudan, and you know, it can't be a very stable country for archaeologists to work, but it is. There are lots of archaeology has been going on there, and this is the ancient palace at the ancient city of Meroe. Now you pronounce the E there, W, so that's Merow, M-E-R-O-W. I pressed the little button on the screen and I could hear it, Merow. And so the ancient city of Merow. So this isn't in Egypt. This is actually in Sudan. This is past the Aswan Dam. So when I was a child, like you guys, you would have heard about the Aswan Dam building project. Well, the Aswan Dam building project was already up by the time I was born, but you start to think there's nothing south of the Aswan Dam. There's nothing, and then you see these Hollywood films of Hatshepsut killing these Nubian slaves, and you're thinking, well, these Nubian slaves comes from Sudan, but as they're slaves, they couldn't have had an empire, surely. That's 2 and 2 coming together and coming up with 466. Completely wrong. So again, back to this article. Hidden beneath an ancient palace is what is now, in what is now central Sudan. Archaeologists have discovered the oldest building in the city of Merow, a structure that also may have housed royalty. So hidden beneath an ancient palace, they found a building associated with a royal family. Now, who are these royal people? What do they relate to? So these are the Kushite pharaohs, the black pharaohs of this landscape of Sudan. And basically, when you think about the area of Sudan, the rich area of Sudan, going all the way down to Khartoum in the south, and going just up to the Aswan Dam, and with Merow basically at the heart, as we saw the plan a few moments ago. This is that kingdom, and it expanded north, it expanded south, it expanded east, it expanded west. It warred against the Egyptians, the Libyans. It warred against lots of different people. The capital of a vast empire that flourished around 2,000 years ago. In fact, 2,700, 800 years ago. The strange thing about this world is that they just suddenly appeared as a kingdom. It's almost as if they suddenly tamed their environment and they started building cities. But then again, we've all got to start somewhere, haven't we? So Merow was centered on the Nile River. So if we just go back a moment again, back to that, you can actually see Merow there. And if you head all the way up to Abu Simbel, that's a sort of the sort of spreading a little bit further into the Aswan Delta there. That this is sort of the area of this wonderful world of the Nubians. And there's another site known there as Napata. Anyway, back to this little article. I'll read out myself. So if you want to keep that there, and you can keep these as well. So I'll just go back to my notes. The capital of a vast empire that flourished, and it had a stretch of over 1,000 miles, and at the point that it actually ruled into Egypt as well. People of Merow built palaces and small pyramids like these ones behind me, like the ones on the screen, and developed a writing system that scholars still can't fully translate. And well, it's no surprise they can't fully translate it. And why? It's because of archaeologists like me, who take years to publish their results of archaeological excavations. The great archaeologist, the great British archaeologist Garstang, was working within this world before the First World War, but he didn't publish his results. So all the information that he'd learnt about these people, he didn't publish his results. So that meant when Howard Carter comes along in 1922, and we've got the wonderful discovery Tutankhamun's tomb, everyone knows about Egypt again, and everyone's always known about Egypt. And then there's another archaeologist excavating again in the 1940s and the 1950s. He doesn't publish his results either about this great world of the Kushite kingdom. So people have been working there, but they don't publish their results. This is why we've got to publish our results. I've got the results of a medieval village that nobody's ever excavated and nobody really knows about in the Vale of Glamorgan. And all the stuff is in boxes, and I've never published that yet, and I intend to do so. But if I was hit down by a truck tomorrow, nobody'd ever know about that village. So the fact of the matter is, you've got to publish your results. You've got to. And so back to this. Although Merow and this wonderful world has been known about, and people have been excavating there on and off. It's only now that the black pharaohs are coming into their own, and so it's increasingly becoming important in Sudan as well, because they're not warring as much, and Sudan is settling down, which means that the archaeology becomes more and more relevant. And it's interesting that the archaeology becomes more and more relevant in a Muslim stroke slightly there's Christian enclaves there as well. It seems that this sort of history from the past is actually coming to Sudan, and they're sort of embracing it. This is what I'm reading. This is what I'm seeing. So the other thing as well is we're like Egypt, like Sudan, we know that there's a rich developing Neolithic culture occurring. And then what we do find is in the terms of the text that I've got in front of me, back to this wonderful article that I've got, then out of the blue, suddenly about 800 years BC, the Kushite kingdom goes up north and conquers Egypt, right? But it's not as simple as that. We know that the Kushites were developing their world around 1070 years BC. They were more or less being ruled over by Egypt, and they were trading with Egypt. But then the Egyptians were more or less abandoned the south in the period of the New Kingdom. Then you got this 1070 date, and slowly but surely by 800 years BC is the Kushites that are invading Egypt, and they conquer Egypt. The kingdom of Egypt is on the verge of collapse. But what's really interesting is what we're seeing with these people is that not only are they invading Egypt, they're taking on board what the Egyptians do. They've got similar priests, they've got similar gods. The portrayal of their leaders are more or less exactly the same as the portrayal of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. The building of miniature pyramids emulates the pyramids in the north, for example, and they've got temples in Meroe dedicated to Amun. Now Amun, the same spelling of Amun, a highly regarded Egyptian god. They're building these temples that sort of emulate their cousins in the north. And it's almost as if this is a pseudo-Egyptian culture, which is not pseudo and is completely on its own back. So looking for the origins of the Kushite Nubian civilization, they are excavating sites such as Meroe. And one of the things that they're finding when they're excavating sites such as Meroe is that these people are massively dependent on cattle, right? They're not massively dependent on goat and sheep that would be commonly people would be dependent upon in the Middle East today. So they're massively dependent on cattle. And what's indicated of these Nubian people is that one minute they're sort of semi-nomadic pastoralists, and the next minute they start to build towns and cities along the River Nile. So they started to build towns and cities along the River Nile around 1070. They're removing the sort of ilk of the ancient Egyptians towards the north into the 800s, into the 700s. They're invading Egypt and they're ruling over Egypt. So from one moment they're semi-nomadic, and the next minute they're the great empire builders, and they're very successful. They are very so successful. They're still around at the time of Alexander the Great, into the 330s year BC. They're into the time of the Roman world, and they've got this interchange between the Romans, where the Romans conquer them and then they kick the Romans out. And it's almost as if they've got this ability to do this. They're a bit like the Afghans, actually. Nobody's ever been able to conquer Afghanistan, and it's almost as if nobody's really been able to conquer Sudan for a massive length of time. And it's that thing. So what they're doing, they're finding mud brick buildings, they're finding stone built buildings like the one behind. They're finding vast amounts of pottery, lots of cattle bone, as I've said, rather than goat and sheep bones. And this and what we do find is a backdrop to these people the ignorance that has been caused to them, and the disservice that has been caused to them by archaeology. And it was interesting at the beginning. Chris said, "Oh, we're going to be doing the Nubians," and I said, "Yes, you know I'd be doing the Nubians, because it's something that isn't on the norm." So when we think about this Moreau landscape, and we think about archaeologists like John Garstang, seeing these pyramids that you can see, these little miniature pyramids within the landscape, and underneath them there's steps leading down. Some steps leading down are really deep steps, and these really deep steps then lead to burial chambers. But there's one interesting thing. This is a clue to where we're going to go. We've got a National Geographic article that we're going to be doing today as well. It's very difficult concept. Today, to excavate these sites, you've got to have skills at being a nautical archaeologist. Yeah, nautical archaeologist. So you're in the middle of the Sudan, the River Nile, but the chambers are being filled with water. So when the archaeologists have gone and excavated the entrances into the chambers of the much larger pyramids, like these much larger pyramids, they're coming up across banks of water, which has meant that lots of these sites have never been looted, because when grave robbers go down there, they can't get into them because they're flooded. So that means that the artifacts are still in there. But the downside is some of the mummified remains and the wooden artifacts have long since rotted away. But there is gold, and there is those things that go bump and the like down within these sites. It's there. So Garstang, when he excavated at this Moreau landscape with monuments like this, when Garstang excavated, he was describing that there were palaces and temples filled with artifacts, and he'd found the royal city, but he didn't actually publish his results. He didn't. It's okay for me to say, "Oh, by the way, I found a Roman fort. It's wonderful. It's towers and walls and ditches, and I found loads of Roman Samian ware and gold, and everything was there. Where is it? Oh, I'm dead." So unfortunately, it becomes a fantasy. The Nubians have been a fantasy. They've been a fantasy subtext. When we think about archaeology, they're the missed archaeology. They're the people who are long to be forgotten. And it's only over the last few years that people have actually been looking at Garstang's notes, John Garstang's notes. It doesn't mean to say he was a bad archaeologist. He was just an archaeologist that had so much work on that he was unable to publish it. It's a bit like being asked to do. It's a bit like being asked to do lots of work, as archaeology companies being asked to do lots of work now in Llanelli, in Pontypridd, and we can't do the work in Llantwit Major because we just got too much work on, and even if we did, it would be that we probably wouldn't be able to publish it, which defeats the object of doing archaeology. So people are actually looking at Garstang's notes today, and architectural elements from what may have been an early a moon temple dating back to the 600-700s were found during Garstang's excavation. So basically what we're finding, we're looking at Garstang's notes, and we're actually finding the building that this sort of article's about. And we got the association with a moon, and successfully finding many of the things that Garstang was talking about. But other archaeologists have worked there since, and unfortunately other archaeologists have worked there since unfortunately also haven't published the results. So we've got all this information that has been looked at and examined, and it's not come out there. And ancient Egypt has always been the landscape that tells us more about Africa than anywhere else. Ancient Egypt absorbs everyone's interest about Africa. Forget about the Nigerians, forget about Great Zimbabwe, forget about the Kingdom of Aksum in Egypt. Everyone seems to be interested in Egypt, and they forget about the rest of the wonderful glories in Africa. And this is one of those glories in Sudan, where you've got the Kushite kingdom. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to scroll through a load of images. So at least I want to Goff moaning at the end that he didn't see many images this week. So this is for you, Goff. Now we're gonna show a load of images. So do you know what? I'm a bit of a bully sometimes when it comes to Goff. So here we go. We're showing this great Kushite empire. So when we go into the 700 years BC, the Kushites rule over all that, and they actually go all the way up to Tyre. They actually take over the world of the ancient Egyptians. The reason why they're able to take over the world of the ancient Egyptians is because the ancient Egyptian world had collapsed. It did. In the 1,000 years before. Start again. In the 1,000 years after the can't get my words out. In the 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, well, the ancient Egyptians have had to fend off the sea people. They've had to fend off the Kushite kingdom. They've had to fend off the Assyrians, the Persians. They've had to fend off Alexander the Great, and eventually, the last discourtesy, they've got the Romans. So you can imagine, for that 1,000 years, Egypt is in a mess, and it means the likes of the Kushites were able to rule over Egypt, not for a massive length of time. None of those people I've mentioned ruled over Egypt for a massive length of time. It was like that poison chalice that nobody really wants to keep hold of for too long because the Egyptians are so strange, right? But and I mean that in jest. But the fact of the matter is, we sort of click through, and what we've got cuneiform. Now, we do have cuneiform texts associated with the Kushites, but they have their own form of writing as well. And we do, and if anyone's actually looking at the screen, you'll actually notice some dates down in the bottom hand of the left-hand corner. And you think, Karl said that the Kushite kingdom was between 1070 to BC to about 300 years AD. But within the landscape building up to this great Kushite empire, you've got people producing pottery 500 years or so before, around the time of Tutankhamun, in this sort of land of Nubia, and this is a type of pottery that they're developing before this great Kushite kingdom of 1070, and then may it go on. And obviously before, again, the Kushite world, to give you an idea of how rich the Kushite world will become, this is about 500 years again before, and you've got this beautiful copper mirror. So we've got the developing background to the Kushite empire, and then it leads us to them to sort of leap up and take the mantle and to be this kingdom. So they didn't actually come from nowhere. They were developing as a people, and as a developing people, what we've got portrayals. And this is dead Nubian prince Haquanefer bringing tribute for King Tutankhamun. This is from the tomb of Hai, and this dates from the 340s, from the 18th dynasty. And this actually before the Kushite world develops into this empire that we're actually talking about. You can actually see portrayals of these people as they would become. This is when they were actually under the rule of ancient Egypt, before their kingdom properly set off. So, again, the great link between the Nubians and the Egyptians, again, before the Nubian world develops in 1070. This is from the 1350s years BC. Again, you can actually start to see why the Nubians become so much like the Egyptians, because it was in their blood. You know, it was this interchangeable. Somebody said on Tuesday it was the Nubians who first built the pyramids, and I said no, it wasn't. It's the Egyptians who first built the pyramids. Then lots of other people actually the Babylonians first built the pyramids. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, it's because they're so linked. You can't really differentiate much between them unless you look really closer. So this is why when people look at the ancient Egyptians, it sort of completely surpasses the Nubian world, because they're so alike. But what is slightly different is when you look at these statues. Now, what you can actually see with these statues made out of black basalt, you can actually see that these figures of their pharaohs, even they look pharaoh-like. Their portrayals are slightly different, and the headgear is slightly different. This one over here, which is a representation, I do believe, of an Lamani. This one looks very much pharaoh-like, but the rest look very different. But they do create statues, and the one thing that we would say is that when the Nubian kingdom did actually rule over Egypt, they actually built temples that were exactly like Egyptian temples. They didn't build Nubian temples. The Nubian temple was basically the same as Egyptian temples. So in archaeology, when people are actually looking at this period that the Nubians actually ruled over ancient Egypt, what they can't really do is differentiate between Nubian build and Egyptian build, because it's more or less exactly the same. It's a bit similar today. If you had a Welsh builder building in London and a London builder building in Wales, they would be building practically the same buildings, except the Welsh builders would be building far superior buildings in England than the English builders building in Wales. But that would be the only difference. No response to that. And look at this. Look at this. The great leader Pi, P-I-Y-E, is the great leader of this Nubian world. When they had a great victory at Jabal Barkal, in their conquest of Egypt, you've got a temple constructed by Pi, dedicated to Amun at Jabal Barkal, as reverence to this great victory that the Nubians had at Jabal Barkal. And there's no real difference between an ancient Egyptian temple of Amun and a Nubian temple to Amun. And the pyramids themselves, the differences in pyramids is that when we look at the wonderful image here, the pyramids of Nuri. Now, there are many pyramids at Nuri, and dedicated to Pi, and dedicated to great pharaoh of Ta-Haraka, and dedicated to Nashdasen. All these great pharaoh names, and when you look at those names as well, Nashdasen, they do sound very different from the names of Egyptian pharaohs, like Seti, like Ramesses, like Tutankhamun, and the names of the pharaohs are different. They're different. But what we've got in regards to the construction of pyramids, whereas pyramids are being constructed in Egypt 4,600-700 years and beyond years ago, so that's 4,700. So the ones at Giza are 2,600 years BC, 4,600 years ago. These ones are being constructed around 2,700 years ago. So you can see there's a distance in time. There's a distance of 2,000 years. Let me say again, 2,000 years between when the Egyptians are building their first pharaohs and the Nubians are building their pharaohs. So it's what I said on Tuesday was that there's a parallel between 1453, when Mehmed the Great conquers Constantinople from the Byzantines, and therein ends the Byzantine Empire. But does it? Because when Mehmed proclaims the capture of Constantinople, Mehmed the Great says in 1453 that now I can reinstate the Roman Empire. I am the legacy of the Roman Empire. This is what he's saying. And in many ways, and it's hard to believe, isn't it? Why would a Muslim say that he is now the inheritor of the Roman Empire? He's now the legacy of the Roman Empire. But then again, the Roman Empire was not founded on Christianity. It was founded on paganism. So it wasn't the religion that Mehmed was proclaiming. It was actually the ideal of the Roman Empire. Whereas when you think about the Nubians, the ideal and the religion and everything is taken on board by the Nubians. So that's a slight difference, but basically the Nubians are embodying the Egyptian world. just as Mehmed was the embodiment now of the old Roman world, so were the Nubians the embodiment of the new world that they had conquered and inherited from the Egyptians in the 700s and the 600 years BC, when the Nubians had conquered their old masters, their old Nubian. They that idea of these Nubian slaves and so on and so on. Whether I agree with any of that is I don't. But what I do agree with is that the legacy now is being taken over by the Nubians. They are the inheritors of the Egyptian world. And they are not to be seen as people who are slaves. They are not to be people who are a walkover. They are not to be people who should be resigned to history. Those people thrown into the fires and wells of Hatshepsut. These are very powerful people with a very powerful message. The same very powerful message that Mehmed had when he conquered Constantinople in 1453. So take away the slave stuff, which take it away, and make these Nubians stand up and to shine within the world that Garstang should have told us back when he excavated these archaeological remains. The great victory of Jebel Makal by King Sen Kamanesken. And again, what you can see is it's almost as if you squint your eyes and you're back in ancient Egypt. But this is actually a hieroglyphic work at the temple at Jebel Bakal associated with a moon. And it's going to have those Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's going to have that Egyptian style. And why not? Because the Nubians are the legacy of the Egyptian ideal, but from a Nubian point of view. When we look, we know lots. We do know lots about the Kushite world, but the problem has been that we haven't really been able to push it out as much. So I'm just going to take a guess. More books have been written about the pyramids alone, just those 3 pyramids at Giza. More books have been written about those 3 pyramids at Giza than have been written about the Kushite Empire. Right, so just one area, more books have been written about that than the whole Kushite world. And look how much there is in Egypt. So these are thus a footnote. Just like the Chakahoya people of South America. These are just a footnote of history. And the reason why we do this is to actually tell you about these people. And I've actually got a question to actually ask you in the break. And I just want to sort of ask a couple of you actually. But we'll leave that for now because we'll get distracted. Hang on a minute. So again, this is as the Kushites are shown and broadcast to their people, and this is a relief from the Apadana Palace, a Kushite delegation on the Persian world. Persians are recognizing these Kushites. The Persians have long since defeated the Kushites, but the Kushites have moved south. You know, they defeated them. But so our boys, we might see you again, right? We'll have another fight one more time. Kushites retreat south, and they will ever be within Sudan eventually. To go toing and froing between conquest, resettlement, and so on. Again, the Kushites to me feel so much like the Afghanis. Right, they really, really do. The proud Afghan people, where you can conquer them for a little time, but then you're going to get your kingdom back, and then we might conquer you. I've never seen the Afghanis conquering Russia yet, but you know it could happen. So again, what we do see from a burial, a Nubian king known as Amenetekilepti, which is completely not the pronunciation. But a mummy of a Nubian king. Now that's a really good point. So this is associated, jewelry found on a mummy of a Nubian king. We've got most of the names of the Nubian pharaohs. We've got most of the burials of the Nubian pharaohs. We know where they were. We've got all that stuff, right? And we're thinking, well, hang on a minute. We're still trying to work out the Egyptian pharaohs, and we've got most of the Nubians. Well, what the hell's going on here? Surely the Nubians should have more of a story to tell than the ancient Egyptians. Blasphemy, I shouldn't have said that. But I always like doing the underdog, as you know. I really do. So gold. So they've got access to gold, copper. They've got access to bronze, obviously tin, obviously zinc with brass, and obviously the big thing that they've got access to is they've got access to iron. This is an Iron Age culture. These are people who have got iron swords. So these people, they come out of nowhere. They defeat the Egyptians. They war in the Levant, and they've got iron. They've got access to the iron. And just one unknown sort of footnote is that iron is being refined and it is a process of technology a lot earlier than people realize in Africa. We didn't sort of take the iron technology to Africa. In a way, it's sort of contemporary. So this is what we're talking about. So this is why we're up and coming with these people. And look at that! Isn't that absolutely wonderful? A little head diadem, a little sort of sub crown for these people. And I actually thought this was really fine, really subtle. And you've got those petals, and you would have worn this as a sub crown, a diadem. You'd have worn it as some attire found in the pyramid of King Tallaghmani. And this is from one of the Nuri pyramids. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, my God, this was found in a pyramid. But nothing's been found in the ancient Egyptian pyramids, those three at Giza. And the reason why nothing's been found in those ones at Giza is that they were long looted years ago. And there's actually one or two Egyptologists saying that they were never meant for burials in the first place, right, at Giza, right? But that's another topic, which I'm not going to do. I'm not going to get into that argument, right? But the fact of the matter is, the burials are actually in the pyramids in the Nuri site, within the landscape of the Kushite Empire. And I would like to just correct one thing on something. Even though you've got some Egyptologists arguing that the Great Pyramids at Giza were not actually originally meant for burial, actually the whole idea of the pyramid is actually for burial, because the idea of the mastabas. So what you would do, you would have a burial, you would have a platform above it, and then somebody else is buried, another burial platform above it, creating a step pyramid arrangement, as we see in lots of other cultures in regards to Central America as well. So the whole idea of the pyramid initially was for burial. But anyway, let's not get into that other thing about the three pyramids. A Meroitic prince smiting his enemies. So this is Meroitic prince. This is a house of the Kushite world, and this is into the period just after the birth of Jesus Christ. And again, that portrayal there of smiting their enemies. So if we actually go back a bit, that this is like in the years after the birth of Christ. And if we go back a little bit, and we see the same thing. Now, this is a Kushite thing. This is a Kushite portrayal. You grab their hair and you pull them up and you say, I am the one in charge. And this is what they're saying. And this is again what they're saying here, right? What's he going to do? What is he going to kill them? Are they? This is the thing, and you can see a hound there feasting at one of the enemy on the ground, and again, this is in the period after the birth of Christ. Now you think, well, ancient Egypt has succumbed to Rome. Why are these still people? Why are these people still around? And they are. Now this is actually a Kushite script from those years after the birth of Christ, and it looks very interesting. So this is the lower written script, the heretic script, you could call it, of the priests and the scribes and so on. But this itself is the written sort of text. And this is a mud brick text. Mud brick text. Yes, that's written in rather than carved in. So there's a mud brick text. And again, they got their own form of writing, which if these people had been studied, if there had been that great study, that great love of these people, maybe we might be able to translate that. Maybe we might be able to just sort of get an idea what that means. but the attention hasn't been on these black pharaohs. And I think there's been a lot of interest over the last decade, you know, black pharaohs, and people go, what? And you're thinking, no, yeah, the Kushites, they were black pharaohs. They were very, very dark-skinned pharaohs. And then you're thinking, well, lots of the Egyptians were really dark-skinned. But I think you're missing the point. These were black pharaohs, right? They were very, more or less dark, really black-skinned. And this is the point. But the big deal is that the study has not been into these people. And it's a great shame. To be honest with you, this is the up-and-coming archaeology of Egypt. This is the place to go. Sudan. Give it a couple of years. I know Keith would have had dealings with the Sudan, but we won't talk about that. But give it a couple of years, and Sudan should be okay to sort of visit, and the archaeology as rich and unexplored and as fascinating as ancient Egypt. And within this sort of landscape, again, back to this image, you've got this great lake. They had artificial reservoirs as well. And the artificial reservoirs sort of put another perspective onto these people. Obviously, water being very important, the Nile being very important, the flooding of the Nile and all the rest of it. And you've got the source of the Nile, the white and the blue Nile. So the blue Nile going off towards the east, and the white Nile going off towards the southwest. I have to work my directions then. I'm just going to go on to the other images. I'm going to come back to this one, and then I might give you a few facts, and I might take a break, actually. So again, slightly different from your normal everyday garden Egyptian pharaoh. This is rather interesting, and there's 2 points for this one. The description is the Archer King, an unknown king of Meroe, dating back to 200 years BC. I did say that we know about most, if not all, more or less, but there are 1 or 2 kings, pharaohs of the Kushite kingdom that still need to be identified, but I think they probably will be as soon as somebody actually gets into transcribing lots of their scripts. But by the way, this one actually describes them all in a list. Oh right, yeah, sorry, we know which the missing one is now. It's just been laziness on the part of archaeology. But then again, you know, one thing that really gets my goat, and you know what gets my goat, is Stonehenge. Why are they wasting so much money into researching Stonehenge when we've got more pressing concerns in archaeology to research than wasting money on Stonehenge? And I believe that all this money wasted on the Great Pyramids in Egypt and the Sphinx, instead of putting that money into conserving sites and putting that money into having a more worthwhile research on ancient Egypt, a more worthwhile discussion. And this again, people should have been looking at this civilization like lots of the other civilizations we've been looking at. Look at Temessos, for example, that we did last week. Okay, I was saying that I don't agree with Temessos being excavated at this stage, but we know my friend bugger all about Temessos. It was a wonderful, elegant way that Ellen was talking about Temessos earlier on. But we can't push anything further than what I said and what Ellen said earlier on about Temessos, because it hasn't been excavated, because the research hasn't been in there. But we do have the technology to do research without excavating these sites. But we seem to be obsessed with looking into Pompeii and looking into Stonehenge and looking at the Great Pyramids. We should be looking at these other areas, and it's such a pleasure to actually bring you these other areas of archaeology. And again, a relief from Nakwa, depicting Amintor from left to Natakamani, and 2 princes approaching a 3-headed Apedernak. So that's one of their gods. Excuse the pronunciation. I'm trying to do my best on a subject that other than this week I didn't know. I was just new to me, more or less. But you can see the different portrayals there. They look pseudo-Egyptian, but there are some subtle differences. And this wonderful Taharkia's shrine, the Pharaoh Taharkia's shrine, this is actually in the Ashmolean Museum. And this is why we've got the British Museum. This is why we've got the Ashmolean Museum. And this is why we've got this argument out there of whether we should return these artifacts back to countries of origin. Because if it wasn't for having some of these artifacts in the Ashmolean Museum, in the Smithsonian, in the Bibliothèque Nationale, right, in the Pergamon Museum, and so on and so on, if we didn't have these artifacts in these great national museums, right, we would not know about the Nubian world. We would not know about them. It's by looking and having that sterile intercourse, is about having that connection to actually, again, in the background, the word Nubia. It's not Egypt, it's Nubia. It's a different world. And this is again, not by just doing it here, by actually looking at these displays and to actually understand them. You know, I'm not saying stop displaying stuff about ancient Egypt, but please, let's display more about other cultures around the world to basically say we need these museums, because we need these museums to tell us about your world, because your world is as important as ours. Your world is as important as the Sutton ship burial. And again, Taharqia's kiosk at Karnak, as they've conquered Egypt, Taharqia constructs this great attachment, the kiosk, to the Karnak temple. It's very difficult to actually work out what is actually an ancient Egyptian build and what is ancient Nubian build. But I think this is one of those weird empires that seems to have an identity associated with the empire that it conquers, which probably makes things quite easy to sort out. Taharqia of ancient Egypt as a prince before he becomes pharaoh, or this is as he is a pharaoh, carved into the sandstone. So this is obviously preserved. Again, slightly different than ancient Egyptian portrayals. And as we sort of go to here, I just wanted to mention, as I have a slurp, what we do see is stone. There's argument. I was reading my notes that that lots of these are stone-built pyramids, and then you've got lots of them being mud-built pyramids. So there's a mixture, really. And what we can say is that the Sudanese government has done something really interesting. Right. So you've got the pyramid on the center and the right. And what they've done, they've recorded them and they've stuccoed them over to actually conserve them for future generations. And that is the way to do things. And what we do see, we see that with Ur, for example, where we got the great mud brick pyramids at Ur, in Iraq. And what we've got is that they stucco the outside, or they put more bricks on the outside to actually preserve the archaeology there, and in doing so it's going to be there for future generations. The other thing as well is you like to think that maybe it might have been bit of sort of decoration on there as well, and why not? We haven't got any of that decoration preserved, or it might be in one of these pyramids sort of actually decorate the outsides. So you've got these two big pylons on the front as you go through an entranceway that actually goes down these steps. It doesn't actually go horizontally, it actually goes diagonally down. And it's in those diagonal, they're really steep diagonals. They're not sort of like this. They're really steep diagonals down. So some of the much larger ones, the one behind, for example, what you do find is that there's steep stairs, and then you go into the chambers below, and they're flooded. Right. So that's where I want to go. That's where I want to go after the break. Actually, a National Geographic piece. It's quite bizarre. And then I'll round up with a few key facts. I think that'll be the best thing to do today. So I've got to get my bearings a minute. And we've got right. Okay, I might need to take a break because I just I'm not feeling too well a minute. Right. Okay. Yeah. Like, yeah. I think I'm going to take a break. Right. So right. Is there any questions? I'm okay to do questions in a minute. I'm fine. Goff, anything you'd like to say? Oh, well, actually, what I'd like to do is mention this other thing that I was going to mention. The
better take a break.
yeah, I need to take a break. I'm gonna have to
take a coffee break. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask for questions afterwards. I need to take a break.
Okay.
I'll see you in about 10 minutes, folks.
Yeah.
All right.
No problem.
Okay, I'll see you then.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, see you in a minute. See you in a minute.
Yeah.
See you in a minute.
A friend of mine went to Sudan about 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
and she there weren't many people going with. In fact, there wasn't anybody. She went with a guide, or completely on her own.
Wow.
I know. I just can't believe it. And she sent me some photographs of all of these things that Karl is showing.
Yeah.
She lived with the she lived in the huts and went round with this guide, around all the local people and lived with them.
Yeah.
And she had the most amazing time. She was there for about 3 or 4 weeks, and she sent me some absolutely amazing pictures, most of which Karl has already shown. Just trying to look through and see if there's anything different, but hang on. That was one of the, nothing different, I don't think.
Oh yeah.
And she said they were literally tripping over archaeology.
Yeah, it's weird.
Everywhere they went, she said it got to be kind of commonplace. It was so, it was unbelievable.
Well, it's just been so chaotic there, isn't it, for such a long time?
I know.
Sudan,
she said the people were just fantastic, amazing people. The guide was brilliant, and very brave.
Yeah, she was. Blimey.
She also went in the hottest period,
Oh, God.
which was probably another reason why nobody was there.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. I always wish I could be that brave, but I never am.
No, I wouldn't be, I'm afraid. I like to have a bit of company.
Yeah. And safety.
Yeah. There was a program, actually, I don't know if it was last year, on the Kushite Empire. I can't remember whether it was last year or the year before. But,
I know, they all roll into one.
Yeah.
This year won't. We'll remember this year.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing else to do.
I know.
Although I have to admit, I'm forgetting normal conversation and words, and
I know. I think everybody's the same.
And all, people's birthdays. It just all rolls into one.
I know. It's definitely done something to us.
Yeah. If I didn't have Facebook to remind me of people's birthdays, I'd be in dead trouble.
I know. Oh, the only good thing is we're all the same.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I saw your husband going past earlier on with the dogs.
Oh yes. I send him out on a Thursday.
Yeah. We must be home now because it was some time ago. So,
He is. He's bought me a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Oh dear. How's Lynn?
She's okay. Yeah, she's looking after Archie at the moment, but she's finding it very stressful because he's this recording. I better not say anything.
Hang on a minute. I'll turn it off now. Hang on. Sorry. Right. Okay. I will. I'll put that on thingy. Right. We're on. So there you go. So I think the question is, what happened to the Kushites? Now, we can answer that, but like many disappearances of people it all came because there was disagreement within. But I would say that the achievement of having an empire, or very wrong word, of having a civilization from around 1070 all the way BC all the way to around 300 years AD, to have that achievement, to keep that sort of sense of identity going for that period of time, is an incredible achievement. Now, after they had kicked off the ilk of the Egyptians, as I said, moving away around 1070, that's where they start to come into their own identity, and they're starting to create their kingdom around just before 800 years BC. And then you've got this really big kingdom that sort of ranges all the way into Egypt and so on and so on. I think that is a phenomenal achievement for a people now we know little about. And I really loved that story. I think it was Jane. She had a friend that went wandering with a lone guide around the Sudan looking at these sites. I'm not going to say it was incredibly brave. I would say it's incredibly amazing that somebody recognized that the Sudanese were so amazing in the first place. It's not the type of place that anyone would actually go. So hats off to a friend who actually went there. That's a massive thing, to actually go there, to actually see these people, and to actually give us more about these people. So that's brilliant. So I just want to sort of give another point of view, another little bit of a perspective, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got everything flowing up here. Yes, it is. And we're moving that away. So a few key facts. So the Kingdom of Kush is centered, like ancient Egypt, along the River Nile. The region of Nubia was an early cradle of civilization. I haven't used those words, but we've got an early sense of civilization, producing several complex societies that engaged in trade and industry. That's what made them relevant to the Egyptians in the first place. This is why the Egyptians conquered the Nubians. And then with the collapse of Egypt, slowly but surely, this is why the Nubians said, we're going to have our own identity, about 1070. So what we've got little city-states erupting in the Sudan area, usually around the River Nile. Yeah, and those little areas of identity eventually engaging into an overall society that gives that sense of a kingdom of Kush, and that's when we get into 1070. Now, as I said before, it goes back and forth. So before 1070, the Egyptians are in and out. They need the resources that the landscape attracts, the likes of the copper, the likes of the stone, the likes of the special minerals, and obviously you could say that because these people are around the Nile, they've got the ability in the sense of agriculture, and they've got their cattle and all the rest of it. So that's going to be really important to the Egyptians. So with all that going back and forth, the monarchs, the pharaohs of Kush ruled Egypt for well over a century, but were finally expelled by the Assyrians, who conquered sort of Egypt. And then there was to and fro in between who was actually in control of Egypt. And then what then happens is you've got lots of to and fro in between the Romans and then the Nubians wanting to have their own identity. So by around the 300s, the Kingdom of Kush persisted as a major regional power until that very date, when it was weakened and disintegrated from internal rebellion amid worsening climatic conditions. Like many things, you have people disagreeing, and you've got the princes. I'm in charge. No, you're in charge. She is in charge. Now, we've not mentioned women at all. And one of the key facts with these people is that women call the shots. Now, what I should have said at the beginning, and these are the key facts that I'm leaving to the end. What I should have said at the beginning is that you had female pharaohs who had all the power. Now, when you look about female pharaohs in ancient Egypt, it's almost as if they're sort of frowned upon. You know, Hatshepsut, she ruled, but Hatshepsut's memory was to be lost and hidden and destroyed. You can't have a female pharaoh in Egypt. You can't have the likes of Nefertiti, all the Nefertitis and the Cleopatras having all this power. It was frowned upon. But in the Nubian world, in the kingdom of the Kushites, the women held the power when they were in charge. I'm not going to say they wore the trousers, but they were the ones who were respected to hold the office of power, just like our present day queen is. But that wasn't the case in Egypt. So that's a big difference between the Kushites in Sudan and the Egyptians in Egypt itself. That's a big difference. That's a big sort of departure. Where the religion is parallelly the same, with more or less all the same gods, and the building is parallelly the same, and the trade and most of the ideas, the Kushites were very good at warring. And one of the things that they were expert at, they had expert bowmen. They would use the bow to lethal effect in battle. Now, the Egyptians, as a world, they had access to very well trained bowmen. If you can remember, the Egyptians were out warring against the sea people using their bowmen, but as a weapon of choice, it was the Kushites' weapon of choice, and the portrayals of the Kushites having bows is for all to see. So what I did say is that I wanted to share another article with you today. It's not because I haven't done my homework today. It's because when we started looking at this, I was saying to Mike on Tuesday, as Goff knows, Mike's my best friend.
Yeah.
When Michelle's not about, yeah, that's right. So sure. So I've forgotten what I was talking about. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to share this article in front of you, because there's lots of really interesting things about it. So let's have a bit of a new share. And as we've got, it's entitled "Dive Beneath the Pyramids of Egypt's Black Pharaohs." And you're thinking, what? Oh, well, they must be near the Red Sea, you know? But it's nothing to do with the Red Sea. It's to do with the Nile. And they're not diving in the Nile either. They're diving in the tombs that were once completely on dry land, and because of the changes within the environment, because the likes of the groundwater building, because further up you've got the Aswan Dam and so on, or maybe that's one of the reasons. And obviously water inundation over a long period of time in these tombs. You know, this is very important. So dive beneath the pyramids of Egypt's Black Pharaohs. Now, I thought well and hard on Tuesday, should I use the word Black Pharaohs? And I thought, no, that's in the literature. That's how they're referred to. There's nothing wrong in Black Pharaohs, and they were black. So the 2,300-year-old royal tomb of a Nubian pharaoh appears nearly untouched and submerged, rising groundwater below. So all the chambers below are submerged. What's an archaeologist to do? This is dated the 3rd of July 2019. Now look at that there. Now you're getting very close. And that is very, very impressive. And those are your mud bricks. So you're looking at those and you're thinking, right, where's the archaeology? And the archaeology is actually below it. Now, this is the pyramid of King Aspelta, successor and brother of Alamani, who died around 508 years BC. By 508 years BC, they had lost control of Egypt, right? So this is where they've already lost control of Egypt. They're within their Kushite world, but there's another 800 years to go. Now, if you want to think about this sort of empire continuing for another 800 years, let's do a bit of comparison, right? The British Empire as an entity, sort of from Oliver Cromwell, you could say, sort of that idea from 1660 all the way through to when the British Empire collapsed in 1947 with the give up of India. So that's under half the lifespan that we're talking about. The Kushite Empire has to go from this stage of 580 to around 300 years AD. So I like this article because it was describing some rather interesting areas. I never thought I would be looking at pyramids that you would have to explore because there were kiddie pool sizes of patches of brown water in the entrance to them, as it's got there. So one of the pharaohs that they wanted to look at was this pharaoh known as Nastasen. Now Nastasen was reigning over 2,300 years ago, and as I was trying to describe earlier on, you've got these steps going down, these really steep steps going down, and there, if you don't know, is actually a diver, and that diver needs to then go underneath that rock and then go up into another chamber, go into another chamber, go into another chamber. And this article describes the story of when they re-entered this in 2019, because this was known about by the archaeologist Garstang. Garstang had been there. He went down there. He basically said, you can imagine it now, can you? Come on, boys. We're going to excavate the steps and we're going to get into the burial chamber. We're going to make the most amazing discovery with a candle, and the light's going to flicker, and then no, it's water. So they removed this, and no sooner as they got at the bottom, there was a big puddle of water. So that's why Garstang didn't go in there, and that's why there's artifacts in there, and that's why, folks, you've got a pharaoh. Yes, a pharaoh of the Kushite kingdom who's still in there. The sarcophagus have been seen and touched by archaeologists, but it's not been opened. Now, you know, I see the point that Jane was trying to make earlier on, and Chris was trying to make. That was a really nice conversation between the two of them about, you know, Sudan being unstable and all the rest of it. But you haven't had people going in there looting them, which is slightly different from what's happening at Pompeii, which is slightly different from what's happening at Egypt. What is different between this archaeology and the Egyptian archaeology? I'm not going to take a guess. Do these people respect their past in Sudan? If so, that's quite a big step. If you want to compare it with somewhere like Egypt, is it because they're too lazy to get the? You can imagine, can't you? You can wander in a shop in Khartoum and you say, "Have you got scuba diving equipment?" And the guy in Khartoum is going, "What? Oh, we're nowhere near the sea. Look, I want scuba diving equipment to dive in the River Nile. No, I want to dive in some tombs." We don't know why people haven't looted these tombs, but there's got to be a very good reason. And there is gold in them. The archaeologists in 2019 were finding gold in them. I know it was, I know it was gold leaf, but they were finding gold in them, and statues, wooden statues, that were gilded with gold, and the wooden statues of decayed, and it's there. And you've got sarcophagus again. A sarcophagus that is still for archaeologists to explore. And again, listening to Jane and Chris talk earlier on, it's a sweltering morning in the desert of northern Sudan, the land of Nubia in the time of the pharaohs, as it is today, as it was in the past. Or was it like that? Sweat drips. Now you're thinking, you're at the top of these steps, right? You're at the top of these steps. And sweat drips into the dive mask hung around my neck. Yes, and you negotiate down these rock cut steps, and you've got waterproof flashlights clank from each wrist, clank clank clank, and a 20-pound weight belt is slung commando style across my chest. We're not making this up. This was 2019. I keep forgetting. 2019 wasn't last year. It was the year before. It's all gone into a blur. An emergency container of air no bigger than a can of hairspray is secured uncomfortably in the small of my back. And you're just thinking, right, this is just like, what is going on here? What is going on here? And so they get to the bottom. And you've got this Dr. Kreischmann. right? So Dr. Kreisman's at the bottom. The guy who's written this article, I gotta remember his name, it's a woman. Sorry, Christine. So you've got this Christine and Dr. Kreisman, and here we go. Dr. Kreisman said, "It's really deep today, Christine. There's not going to be any headroom in the first chamber," and you're thinking that's okay. Kreisman and Christine, trained underwater archaeologists, were granted permission to explore the submerged tomb. And you're just thinking, Christine must be thinking, and having this conversation over the phone with Kreisman. It's only a year and a half ago or wherever, they're having a conversation. And Kreisman saying to Christine, bring your nautical gear, right? And Kreisman's going, "Oh, brilliant, we're going to be swimming in the sea." But no, these are burial chambers, right? And the stone coffin appears to be unopened and undisturbed. So Kreisman disappeared into the water and resurfaces with a steel grate used to seal the tomb entrance. So somehow there must be a locking mechanism down there. And you obviously a steel grate isn't going to stop anyone who thinks there's gold in there, right? But yeah, there we go. You can imagine the steel grate, the size of a television set. They've got to get through that sort of first entranceway, in through that, right? So that's your only space to get in and out of the tomb. So basically, what the steel grate. There you go. You've got to get from the outside now, past those steps, get from the outside, with the scuba diving tanks on into such confines. So what they do, they clip on a hose. They clip on a breathing hose, and you can imagine that this is a noisy gas line fed pump. And this is the line I like the most. Here we go. Dr. Kreisman says, "I'll go first and pull my hose in. If I don't see you in 5 minutes, I'll come and find you." Now, because the first chamber's like a big sort of chamber, and it's really mucky and dark and you can't see anything in it, right? And you can imagine that, here we go, the immortal lines to Christine. "If I don't see you in 5 minutes, I'll come and find you." Well, the last time I realised, I can hold my breath underwater for about a minute and a half, but you'd be dead after 5 minutes, surely, if you panic. So you can imagine that all this is going on, and you've got the diving regulator from the tube in the mouth, and the pyramids of Nuri, as you can actually see from that illustration. The watery tombs. It's like a sandy desert, but they're watery tombs, and it's a burial area of 170 acres. That's a massive area of burials. There actually, you might only see 20 odd pyramids on the screen. Actually, a few off the screen. It was described as these tombs are strung across the landscape like gems on a delicate necklace. So these date from the sort of the height of the Black Pharaoh world. And actually, if you look at that, you can actually see that the landscape, there's more pyramids. There's a pyramid there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's another one there, another one there, there, you get the gist. And they're all over the place. There's thousands of these pyramids across this landscape, thousands of them, and most of them are unlooted. Most of them haven't been entered, even by archaeologists. And you think, well, hang on a minute, isn't this a missing gem of the ancient world? This is a bit like Tremesos, where last week we got a whole city in Turkey that's never been excavated, and you've got most of this landscape, this necropolis of the dead, the necropolis of Nuri. And you get this diverse, rich landscape of burials and settlement and humanity. So these pyramids mark the burials of Kushite royals, the Black Pharaohs, who operated initially as vassals on the gold-rich southern edges of the Egyptian empire. Then suddenly they emerged as a force of their own during the political chaos that followed the demise of the new kingdom. from 760 years BC to around 650 years BC. And you've got these Kushite pharaohs ruling over Egypt, embarking on ambitious building programs up and down the Nile to set their mark. But the irony is they're setting their mark as the Egyptians set their mark in exactly the same way. So you're not sort of doing, oh, I tell you what, boys, what we're going to do, the Egyptians did pink temples, we're going to have red temples with polka dots on them, okay, boys? No, it's basically pink temples, and that's it. So that's what we're saying, a metaphor. They're building exactly the same way as the Egyptians, embodying Egypt, because there's so many similarities. And I'm loath to make this comparison, so I will. And most of the people who will be upset by this have got their mics off. It's the same as Wales to England. The only difference in identity between the Welsh and the English today is the language. The houses in Wales are the same as houses in England in the main. Our roads are the same. Our railway network's the same. The money's the same. Our politics is all in Westminster, right? So in other words, the Welsh are as good as English and the English are as good as Welsh. There's no difference between the two, right? Except there's this sense of identity. In Cymru, the people like to see themselves as different from the English, but if on the surface there's no difference at all, right? And this is what we're saying between the Kushites and the Egyptians. There is a massive difference in their identity, but in the way they're building and in their legacy, there's no difference. So if suddenly, for example, there was a catastrophic event and everyone on the planet died, right? Aliens would be coming down from space and saying, oh, Carnarvon, that's a nice bit of England, isn't it? There would be no real difference because culturally it looks very similar. And this is what we're saying with the Nubians and the Egyptians, and maybe what could have been lost in the print, the small print. People may have been down to Sudan and seen all these temples and pyramids and say, oh, I've been to Egypt. No, they've been to Sudan, for God's sake. And that's the thing. What we're trying to do is recarve out the original Kushite identity for this Kushite world and put it on another level. But at the same time, the similarities are uncanny. And again, if I tell you what, if you dump this in an Egyptian temple, right? In this black granite, the similarities between a similar pose and an ancient Egyptian pharaoh pose would take an expert a lot more learned than me in Egyptology to tell you. So that's the statue of Taharq, who ruled over Egypt. He was one of the pharaohs who ruled over Egypt for over 100 years. The largest and oldest pyramid at Nuri belonged to one of its most famous residents, the pharaoh Taharq, a Kushite king who ruled in the early part of the 600s, rallied his troops to the northern edges of his empire to defend Jerusalem. So obviously at that stage, Egypt's under their control. The Kushites go all the way to Jerusalem and defend it against the Assyrians, earning him a mention in the Old Testament. And definitely recognition by the Egyptians, recognition by those Persian empires of Assyrians and Persia and all the rest of it, with that sense of recognition. So this is an interesting individual called George Reisner. Now, George Reisner, a Harvard Egyptologist, visited Nuri to excavate the burial chambers beneath Taharq's massive pyramid. Reisner team did a wonderful job. You can see some cynicism here. Reisner's team also mapped Nuri's funeral monuments, which included more than 80 royal Kushite burials. Lots of them pharaohs. Pharaohs, male and female. I want to put that point in there. And somebody's left me a message to have a quick look at, so I'll just have a quick look at this. Oh, Pam's got to leave us. If you leave me now, you take the greatest part of me. I'll give up won't give up my day job. Pam's leaving us, so see you, Pam. See you next week.
Bye, Pam.
Bye, Pam. So, Pam interrupted at the wrong time. Pam always seems to interrupt at the wrong time. You know, I love her to bits, but, you know, she's too dishy for me. So Reisner mapped this landscape. 80 Royal Kushite burials, roughly a quarter of which are topped with their sandstone pyramids. And I said we've also got mud brick versions as well. His field notes show that many of the tombs he encountered were already inundated with groundwater percolating from the nearby Nile, making traditional dirt excavation unsafe or impossible. So basically, they excavated the steps. That's good. You know, the cynicism here is Reisner never published the results of his work. So in other words, all this money has been used. All this money's been spent, and it's never been published. It was never published by Reisner. I know the note says an associate cobbled what little was documented into a report published in 1955, right? But basically, that's nothing. That's nothing. And for almost a century, Newry was ignored. And the Harvard archaeologist had offhandedly and inaccurately dismissed the Kushite kings as racially inferior and their accomplishments as an inheritance of older Egyptian traditions. I have not done that. All I've said, from when we started this today, all I've said is that we're looking at this this wonderful tradition. They're just embracing ancient Egyptian ways, and they've got their own identity, but they're also embracing. They haven't sort of inherited and sort of been like the Egyptians. What they've done, they've conquered the Egyptians as well. They're an amazing achievement. They've conquered the Egyptian world, and they were there for over 110 years. So these people have got great accomplishments, and they shouldn't be dismissed. So my memory's going a bit thingy, so I just have to double check something. Christine, I was going to call her Kishley. There's Christine in the it's got that looks definitely like the other image of Christine, but anyway, so it says this: Abigail Brindenstein examines a niche in the wall of Nashdessin's third burial chamber. So this is having to go in through there with all the pipes and all the rest of it. So there's a little niche. It's all rock cut, and the great difference is that when you actually look in these, any frescoes in there, any stucco work, any rendering there, it would have actually fallen off the walls and so on because of the moisture. So it'd be interesting to see what the interpretation is from the debris. So watery tombs. Dr. Kreisman visited Newry in 2018, and only in 2018 we're actually looking at this great burial chamber of Nashdassin and his wonderful pyramid above. A rare opportunity, being given permission from this, permission from the Sudanese government. Kreisman saw a rare opportunity to explore watery tombs that Reisner was unable to tackle a century ago. So Garstang's in, his work's not published. Reisner's work's not published either, except for that stuff published in the 1950s. Funded in part by a grant by the National Geographic, Dr. Kreisner zeroed in on the pyramid of Nashdassin, who ruled between 335 and 315 for 20 years. Because he was the last king buried at Newry, his pyramid was built on the worst piece of real estate in the lowest elevations of the Royal Necropolis, meaning that it constantly flooded. And this final resting place of this pharaoh, the only access he can actually get into it is actually via water. According to Reisner's field notes, his team located and excavated the rock-hewn stairwell that led down to the burial chambers deep beneath Nashdassin's pyramid. One of Reisner's workers entered the tomb and, likely unnerved by the knee-deep water, hastily made his way to the third and final chamber. So there's 4 chambers. There he dug a small... You can imagine he's going, now it's sort of getting flooded in here. Right, okay, there's nothing much in here, boys. Anyway, he's sort of digging... It's almost as if he's panicking. He's got a little sort of bag there. He's one of Reisner's team. And he's collecting a handful of shabtis, which are small magical figurines. Some would have been wood with gilt on them. Some would have been stone or whatever. So he brought them out. And these little figurines were magical figurines. They would come to life to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife. So just think, the pharaoh's fast asleep, right? And he wakes up and he can see all these little people wandering around helping him. It's something like I was charring a chocolate factory, isn't it? Do you know what, Keith? Right? Wouldn't it be great to have loads of little people tending you in the afterlife?
Yeah, all big people. I don't mind. Anything tending me will be fine.
Well, the thing is, because Michelle's only 4'2", right? I've got a little person in my life. Having little people in your life is wonderful, right? Yeah. So this pharaoh had his needs tended to by the little people. And the research team left Nuri, and over the decades, Nashtashian's tomb and the staircase leading to it were again buried under the desert sands, only to be reopened in 2018. So obviously, tantalizing clues. There's our Christine. There it is, and there's all the bits and pieces.
Yeah,
I've got a name. I got a name right this time. What's that, Keith?
I was going to say they're proper archaeologists. These ones, aren't they? Not like these mamby-pamby ones we get over here.
Do you know what? That was uncalled for. You know, it really was. Just because I can't be bothered to do any research with Ham Manor and see if there's any archaeological resources there. You don't have to actually have a go at me. Anyway, sure. National Geographic editor Christine Romney sets up equipment in the second chamber of Pharaoh Nashtashian's tomb. So we've got 4 chambers altogether. So obviously it's actually swimming. You know, me and Mike were saying it's like swimming through these little passageways into another chamber, and then getting into that chamber and it's full of water into another passageway. Dr. Kreisman had warned the water reaches to the ceiling in the first chamber. Every movement kicks up a cloud of ultrafine sediments that makes it almost impossible to see what's directly in front. So what's in the first chamber is all down below. Now the problem is, if they actually pumped out the water in these chambers, it would I know the vacuous nature of these chambers, and the water's probably keeping the chambers integral. So if you pump all the water out them, it's almost sort of rips into sort of creating a vacuum, and then the whole thing collapses. So you'd probably have to do nautical archaeology in there to even hopefully be minutely safe. And here we go into the first chamber. Listen to this. Christine, she feels her way into the bus-sized chamber, swimming in circles. So she's got a tube and she's swimming in circles. That's really good. Anyway, she eventually surfaces in the second chamber, which they found out has collapsed. So as they swim into the second chamber, the ceiling's collapsed, right? So whatever's below that ceiling is all been smashed and destroyed and will ever be. And you're thinking, how unstable is that, creating an air pocket? So they take all this stuff in there, and I love this quote, right? I find Dr. Kreisman hoisting bags of gear onto a pile of dry rubble and placing flashlights into plastic jerry cans that gently bob in the water and illuminate the darkness. And the most technical bit of this survey, and you're talking about professionals, Keith, take it back. Empty Red Bull cans serve as floats for a safety line that runs from the back of the tomb to the entrance. Red Bull, Keith, is meant to be drunk, not used as cans floating in a burial chamber.
They're empty. They've been drunk, haven't they?
Yeah, I think that something's happening here. Yeah, you'd have to be effing drunk. I said this to Mike. I said, "There's no way would I do this." I got to tell you a little bit of a story. Years ago, when I was on an expedition in Cyprus, I was actually going into a burial chamber, and I had to sort of drop down into this burial chamber, right? And it was fine. So on my way out, I couldn't get through this gap because the way I got in, I couldn't get through this gap. So I remember screaming, and I said, I'm actually going to physically have to dislocate my arm to actually drag myself out. I was in agony trying to get out of it. I didn't. But yeah, you'd need to be flipping drunk to do anything like this. Swimming through a low, rounded, rock-cut doorway, we enter the third chamber. The stone sarcophagus is dimly visible below us. A sarcophagus with a lid still on it. And this is as far as Reisner's expedition managed to get. Yeah, obviously, they missed the sarcophagus altogether. At this early phase of the project, Reisner's objectives are to demonstrate the safety of the air supply system, gather basic measurements, and thoroughly excavate Reisner's pit. To see what was overlooked, peering inside the stone coffin, will have to wait until next year. So there we go. Look at that lovely little statue there. A Shapti, a small magical figure. And just think, Keith, right, if you take that into your bedroom, it'll come alive and serve all your needs.
My needs are pretty high, eh?
Yeah, well, let's just move on. We might say something you might regret. But there are tantalising clues that the rising groundwater kept grave robbers from looting Nashtassen's tomb. As we excavated Reisner's pit, filling plastic buckets with sediment, swimming them out into the air-filled second chamber, pumping the sediments onto a screen and sifting for artefacts, we discover paper-thin foils of pure gold that likely once covered precious figurines that long ago had dissolved in the water. I wonder if there was water already building up in this chamber as they actually built it. It's really difficult to work that out. Those gilded figurines would have been easy pickings for looters, and their remains are a sure sign that Nashtassen's tomb has been essentially untouched, and nobody's been in there. So this makes it the Tutankhamun's tomb of the Kushite kingdom. On our final, but they wouldn't have had the technology back in Garstang's or Reisner's time to do this, or maybe they did, but you know. On our final dive, Dr. Kreisman and I float silently in water in the back chamber of the tomb, hovering above what may very well be Nashtassen's undisturbed sarcophagus. We talk about the team's goal for 2020 to excavate the Pharoahs' 2,300-year-old submerged royal burial chamber. It's an audacious aim and hugely logistical challenge. I don't think this was done because of COVID, because this would have been last year. I think we finally have the technology to be able to do this. It's a remarkable point in history that so few know about. It's a story that deserves to be told. So there's some of the gold that was actually left behind in that little sort of I think that's the little hole that guy actually dug there, and all these little bits of gold have actually been left behind. So what I'd like to do now, I would like to cut that bit of screen sharing. I've got a few bits of notes, and you can clearly see there that there's that sort of representation that they're not buried pharaoh-like. Even though the figurines around, you know, a typical that you'd see in a pharaonic tomb, a Kushite tomb, this looks very different, and the wrappings and the way this is sort of brought to us from that portrayal. So, if you're gonna all bear with me one moment. Hello, Michelle. I'm still teaching, so can I call you back? Oh, all right. Can everyone bear with me a second, guys?
Yeah, no problem.
Bear with me. Yeah, I'm still here. Oh, you're going back now, are you? All right, when you back? Oh, yeah, that's when I'll be back. Okay, then. I'll see you then. I'll see you later. Love you. Bye. Bye-bye. 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 Do you know, I've got to keep the house witch happy. She would have been really upset. She'd have cast a spell onto me if I, you know. So anyway, so what was I saying? What I want to do now, I want to give you some key facts to sort of end with, right? And let's sort of give you these key facts. So let's sort of do that. So can I just confirm you're looking at these nice little miniature pyramids?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you all agree. So don't worry about it. Just make sure you leave some drinks in the lounge. The Kingdom of Kush was an ancient civilization in Africa, and we've referred to it as the Nubian realm. We've referred to it as Black Africa, and again, just that reiteration that this wonderful kingdom existed from around 1070 years BC all the way flowing nicely into around 300 AD. And we've got that sense of independence away from Egypt in 1070. They're still sort of trading with Egypt. They conquer Egypt, and they're well in control of Egypt by 727. They come across the Assyrians. The empire began to weaken after Rome conquered Egypt and eventually collapsed sometime in the 300 years CE. Now, one thing that we do know is it very similarly to Egypt, had capitals that would move and mutate over time. Now, what I'd like to do is go back to showing you a little bit of a plan on your screen again. So we just go back to that plan that we had at the beginning. So one interesting thing about this is that the location of Napata on your screen there, Napata was located along the Nile River in northern Kush. And it's believed that the Kushites believed that capital was too vulnerable. Because if when Egypt was powerful, it would always invade and capture their capital. So it was thought that the capital should actually move further south, to the place known as Meroe. And after they had lost control of Egypt, by the 590s, the capital moved down to Meroe. And it would mean that if the ancient Egyptians ever did invade again, or anyone else invaded, they might capture Napata, but they wouldn't actually capture their real new spiritual home of Meroe. Now, Meroe itself could be seen to be also ideally placed for iron working, and very many similarities to Egypt. They're mummifying their dead, very similar gods. Most of the gods were the same, obviously with the sense of pyramids, but the ruling class of Kush likely consider themselves Egyptian in many ways. Iron and gold, two of the most important resources of ancient Kush, were gold and iron. Gold helped Kush to become wealthy, as it could be traded to the Egyptians and other nearby nations. We forget that there's that nation down the south that we've done before. We've forgotten about that great empire in Egypt. Okay, so they're having to trade with various different empires around them. The Empire of Aksum. So they're trading with iron, and gold was the most important metal of the age. Obviously, it's the 500s BC. This is in the Iron Age. Iron is now really the thing that everyone needs to get hold of. Not gold, not copper, not bronze, not tin. It was iron. It was used to make the strongest tools. The new industrial revolution of the age was iron. So after all, it is the Iron Age and weapons. The culture of Kush, outside of the pharaoh and the ruling class, the priests were the most important social class in the kingdom. They made the laws and communicated with the gods. Just below the priests were the artisans and scribes, as we see as they are very important in Egypt as well. Artisans worked the iron and gold that was such an important part of the Kushite economy. And actually, that's a really good point. People who can actually turn stone into iron were very special people. You needed to know the temperatures and the kilns to do that. You couldn't just come off the street and create stone into iron. You couldn't do that. You needed to know what to do. You needed to know the temperatures. You needed to have the resources to do it. You needed to have the materials to build. You needed to know that the right light in there is actually hot enough to actually add the iron ore into it. You need to know all these things. And in many ways, this is like that story of Arthur, isn't it? In our consciousness, an individual creating a sword out of a stone. That's exactly what the Kushites did. They made stone into iron. Farmers were also respected as they provided the food for the country. At the bottom were servants, labourers and slaves. We've got so much to learn. Like the Egyptians, religion played an important role in the lives of the Kushites. They believed strongly in the afterlife and little people. The Egyptians didn't have the little people thing. I like the little people thing. I always used to have little people wandering around my bedroom and under my bed when I was a child. My mum thought I was quite nuts. Strangely enough, they're still around me today, Keith. Now, the final point is, this is a massive point. This is a massive difference between the Kushites and ancient Egypt. Women played an important role and could be leaders in the Kushite world. So they could be actually respected leaders, unlike the ones in Egypt. Many of the Kushite leaders were queens and very powerful queens, and they were the ones who decided what was happening. A few sort of interesting little sort of facts. I'm just going to change the image again and sort of move on there. And hang on, we don't want that. Right. Nice bit of carving. This is again a Kushite temple. Just like gonna mention, I'm just gonna see we got something in the chat box. Jane's got to go. Funeral next door, so people to stand outside. See you next week. It can't get any more bizarre, can it? Do you know what I mean? Anyway, see you next week, Jane. We love you lots, and Jane, we've nearly finished. Okay, anyway. Last interesting facts. In battle, Kush was famous for its archers and the bow, very similarly as the English and Welsh archer was known at Crecy and Agincourt. The bow, the archer, the bow and arrow were to be seen as the Kush's one of the greatest assets, often depicted in the art of ancient Kush and elsewhere. Sometimes the region was called the land of the bow because of its famous archers. One of the most famous leaders of Kush was Pi, who conquered Egypt and became Pharaoh of Egypt. Most of the people of Kush were farmers. Their primary crops were wheat and barley. They also grew cotton to make clothing. Again, they got everything to hand. The pyramids at Kush tended to be smaller than the pyramids of ancient Egypt, quite smaller actually. But when you think about it, there are more pyramids at Nuri, the site of the main burials, than in the whole of Egypt. So, you know, there are more Egypts in the land of Kush. This is why somebody said the Kushites come up with the idea of the pyramids first, but slightly a bit after by a couple of thousand years. The burial chambers were located below the pyramids. Many of these pyramids were built near the city of Meroe and can still be seen today, as we've got people who've been out there, haven't we, Jane, her friend, who's no longer with us today. The priests were so powerful they could decide when it was time for the king to die. Now, I did look into that, but I'm thinking, what does that actually mean? People didn't live very long within the Kushite world. The average life expectancy is about 20 to 25 years. So I would assume that life expectancy is gathered to be by getting a mean average, and there were a lot of child mortalities within that. That's what that says to me. Besides gold and iron, other important trade items including ivory, slaves, incense, statues of Lloyd George, feathers and wild animal hides were also traded. On that note, I'm just going to sort of, again, some of the wonderful carvings and some of the wonderful temples, very ancient Egyptian looking, and back to our Kushite world and these wonderful miniature pyramids behind me. Next week we'll be doing China, and we won't be doing the Welsh foreign sort of lecture series yet. I've got to have a word with Jessica, but anyway, what I'm going to do now, as you can probably appreciate, I've got enough in me to take questions, so let's stop that. Right, let's have some questions, babes. I'm talking to you, Keith, because there's no other babes here other than you.
That's true. I'm the best babe, I know.
Yeah, no.
I don't think I've got any, really. I just really look forward to what they're going to find in the next, over the next decade. If they can get in there and explore it all properly.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to find out what's there and what we haven't seen so far.
Yes, I very much agree. I'm for that as well. What about you, Chris Manolo?
That's fine. No, it's very interesting. You know that site that had all the pyramids on, had the big ones, then all these little stumpy ones that you could hardly see.
Nuri, N-U-R-I, Nuri. Yeah.
Yeah. Were they actually smaller pyramids or just different?
they are smaller pyramids. It's not the scale you're looking at. They are smaller pyramids.
What happened to all the stones that they were built with? Did they use the later ones, or?
No, this is a burial ground. This is like a cemetery. This is 127 acres of cemetery. Basically, some are going to be made with mud brick, and some are going to be made with stone. And obviously, the ones with mud brick are going to be really badly eroded away. So yeah.
Yeah, so those ones are gone. Yeah.
Yeah, those are gone. So Godfrey.
Yeah, great. It's good to see the Sudan and the Nubians, because Egypt and the Pharaohs seems to get all the bandwidth, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like the word bandwidth. Yeah, that's the Radio 1. This is not even in the, this is like Rhondda FM. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But unlike Rhondda FM, it's you know, it deserves to be up to BBC One level. You know, that's definite. That's definite. So anyway, Leslie, if there's anything you want to say, you're very welcome.
It's absolutely thoroughly interesting. It's one of my favourite subjects. Me and Steve were watching a programme just last week with a can't remember, I'm no good at names of who the pharaohs were or whatever, but was submersed, part of it in water. And
the site of Abu Simbel, yeah, the great
probably sounds like it. And I mean, it just fascinates me. I kind of get a fear though, you know, like you said, your experience when you were younger. I would love to go and do that, but I'd be so frightened of being trapped in there, you know, and thinking of all the things that could go wrong. But I probably would do it anyway, just for the pure thing of finding out what actually is in there, you know. And there's got to be still things, and they've got to have a way of supporting the walls and pumping it out, and you know, they must have something to be.
There's a technique that the Italians designed thanks to French engineers when Mussolini was doing lots of work in similar circumstances. What they do, they freeze the area. They freeze the area, and then they that area keeps everything integral, and then they allow the water to melt again and whatever. And there's different techniques you can use. There's a way of doing it, I'm sure. The worst thing they could do is actually excavate the sarcophagus in water. So there's got to be a way they must do it outside water, because there's so many problems with water, and you don't know how well sealed the sarcophagus is. So, you know, I'm not going to say it's watertight, but we found Roman coffins that have been watertight. You know, we don't know. We don't really have the answers until it would be a tragedy for them to have a vacuum sealed sarcophagus and then water that would be the worst.
Yeah.
It really would.
No, very, very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. And you've got to stay to the end as well for a quick chat. Right, I don't think the other Chris is there. Is that Ellen there? Ellen's just left the room. Come on, Ellen. Anything? Come on. Anything you want to say, Ellen? Come on. Don't wind anyone up this week, Ellen. Anything you want to say?
Absolutely nothing.
But did you enjoy that, Ellen?
Fabulous. It was very interesting and lovely pictures as well. Thank you.
Good. Oh, shame I didn't have more, but I had a lot of text to get through. But thanks for that. Come on, Chris. Chris looks like she's been... Where's Ellen gone? She's just gone. Did I say anything to upset her? Then I don't know. She's happy. Anyway, Chris.
I had a builder come round, so I had to go outside.
I got to be honest with you. You've always got builders coming around, and I'm just a bit worried.
Well, I fancy letting that secret out.
That's the red light you've got on the door.
I was trying to say, Chris, have you got like this kinky nature that you've got to dress in a coat with a builder?
It's blooming freezing outside.
All right then. Well, I'm not saying any more, Keith. Right, the 4 numpties at Andrea's house. Anything you want to say?
Yes, one thing, Carl.
Oh, yeah. Did you see that? The 4 numpties, and he immediately went for it.
We're used to the abuse now.
Yeah, that's it. Anyway, what happened to all the artifacts that they recovered? Are they stored somewhere or in a museum or what?
The Sudanese museum, they do have a hell of a lot on display. I saw some images of the stuff that they got there. They've got quite a good museum. It's quite amazing that the Sudanese government and the museum and everything has managed to stay intact, and these things haven't been blown up. And I'm just thinking that there's something stopping that happening. I think in the mindsets of the people. There seems to be a level of respect for what's around them. So yeah, there is a lot, and obviously a lot has left the country as well. So anything else? Anything else you want to say, Andrea's gang?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. No.
We watched.
Okay then. So what we're going to do? I'm gonna just to wind Goff up. I'm gonna send the boys around your house. The boys and lads to you know get the shekels. I'm going to do that. So if there's no more questions, I really appreciated you joining us today, and I will no doubt see you all next week. Keith, particularly you. I love seeing you, Keith.
Oh, and I love you too, Daddy.
Yeah, I know, son. Look after yourself, my little boy. Okay.
I will. I will.
And do you know what really got me earlier on? There was this person guessing my age earlier on, and they said, "Oh, thanks for you to join us, Goff. It's it's just finished." He said you've got to be in your 30s.
It's your IQ, mate.
You asked for that.
Right, on that note, I'm going to call it a day. If there's nothing else wanting to be said, I look forward to seeing you all next week. All of you, including you, Goff, because we love Goff and Keith and Chris and the other Chris. So I'm going to say goodbye to Keith, Chris, Goff, stay there, Leslie, Andrea, Karen the Witch, Kathy, and Dodgy Jim. See you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, boys.
Bye.
Bye-bye, lovelies. Oh, God.
I can't leave. There it is. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, son. See you, Chris.
Good night.
Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye. Right, okay. Right, we're going to stop recording now. Thank you very much for watching. And there we go. And off.